The world hadn't ended with a bang. It unraveled with whispers. News anchors had once joked about the flu season being particularly harsh, until cities stopped broadcasting altogether. On the outskirts of a crumbling town in the former Midwest, 17-year-old Caleb Morrow stood in the ruins of what used to be a gas station, clutching a cracked radio like it was the last heartbeat of the world. The static hummed in and out, broken by occasional bursts of distorted chatter. He twisted the knob slowly, barely breathing. Then, finally, something. Repeat, if you are alive, proceed to Sector 12. Coordinates, 78.35, new safe zone confirmed. He dropped the radio in shock. The voice, clean, authoritative, didn't sound like one of the rogue broadcasts. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a directive. A promise. Hope. Caleb grabbed his worn backpack and rushed back through the trees toward the farmhouse he'd been hiding in with his younger sister, Riley, and an older man named Frank, who had once been a trucker and now served as their reluctant protector. Riley met him on the porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You were gone too long," she said, worry and frustration coloring her voice. "I heard a broadcast," Caleb said, breathless. "A real one. Sector 12. It said it's a safe zone." Frank, sitting just inside with a flashlight and a makeshift spear, rose slowly to his feet. "You sure it wasn't a trap? Could have been those raider freaks again." Caleb shook his head. This was different. It didn't sound desperate. It sounded organized. Frank stared at him, the silence stretching long. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his weathered face. "Ain't nothing out here but cornfields and corpses. But if there's even a 1% chance they're telling the truth." "We have to go," Riley whispered. "We can't stay here. We barely have food." Frank didn't argue this time. That was the most terrifying part. Black lozenge. The next morning, the trio set off. The world they stepped into had gone quiet in all the wrong ways. No cars. No voices. Just the low groan of wind through abandoned homes and the occasional rustle of movement that might have been rats, or something worse. They avoided roads, sticking to tree lines and creeks. Caleb clutched a worn-out map in his hand, marked with the last known coordinates. It would take them 3 days if they moved fast, but nothing about travel was fast anymore. Every hour was a risk. Every bend in the trail might hide the undead, or worse, the living. Around noon, they passed the remains of a small town. Storefronts had been shattered. The sidewalks were stained with dark, dried splotches that no rain could wash away. Riley turned her head, refusing to look at the pile of shoes left near a burned-out church. Caleb paused beside a shattered police car and reached through the window, pulling out a long-forgotten duffel bag from the back seat. Inside was a flashlight, a nearly full bottle of water, and, miraculously, a flare gun. He grinned. "That's our miracle for the day," he said, tossing the bag over his shoulder. "You know the rules," Frank grumbled. "1 miracle a day. 2 when you're pushing your luck." They moved on, but Caleb felt it, something had shifted. As if someone, somewhere, was watching. Black lozenge. That night, they camped in an abandoned barn. Riley curled against a pile of hay while Caleb and Frank took turns keeping watch. As Caleb sat near the wide-open doors, scanning the horizon, the wind carried something strange. Not the familiar moans of wandering infected. Not the sound of distant gunfire. This was humming. Low. Rhythmic. Almost mechanical. He turned slowly, and froze. Far off in the dark, barely visible under moonlight, a shape moved across the open field. It was tall. Human, maybe. But its head glowed faintly red, like the light of a scanning lens. "What is that?" Caleb whispered, backing into the barn. Frank stirred. "What did you see?" Caleb swallowed. "I don't know. But it wasn't walking like the others." They waited. Watched. But nothing else came. Black lozenge. By sunrise, whatever Caleb had seen was gone. But now, everything felt heavier. The map said they'd cross an old interstate soon. That meant exposure. Bridges. Open spaces. Places where survivors went to disappear. Frank tightened his grip on his spear. We're getting close. You feel it? Caleb nodded. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad one. Riley stood behind them, her eyes locked on the eastern horizon. Maybe it's both. Somewhere out there, a safe zone existed. Or a trap waited. But in a land where hope had all but vanished, the message on the radio still echoed in their hearts. A new dawn was coming. Whether it would bring salvation or devastation, only time would tell. Black Lozenge to be continued in Part 2. Would you like me to continue with the outline for Parts 2 to 8, or write the full script for Part 2 next? The rising sun painted the sky in bruised tones of orange and purple as the trio approached the rusted highway. Overgrown grass pushed through cracks in the asphalt, and abandoned vehicles stretched for miles in both directions, a silent graveyard of those who had tried to flee. Frank knelt beside a flipped minivan and peered under it. No fresh tracks. Good sign, he muttered, though his voice betrayed little confidence. Caleb glanced up at a tattered billboard that once advertised a family vacation resort. The smiling faces looked grotesque against the apocalyptic landscape. This place gives me the creeps, he said. It's not the place, Frank replied. It's what used to live in it. Riley walked between them, her eyes scanning the windows of a toppled bus. She held a crowbar tightly, its tip stained with a mix of rust and old fights. How much further until the next check-in point? About 10 miles, Caleb answered, pulling the map from his backpack. We'll follow the highway for 3, then cut through a neighborhood to reach the river crossing. Frank grunted. Highway's risky. Open ground. We move fast, stay quiet. If you hear anything, drop low. No questions. They weaved through the wreckage, stepping over shattered windshields and mold-covered backpacks. Each object whispered a forgotten story, but none of them stopped to listen. Halfway across a collapsed overpass, Caleb froze. In the distance, a convoy of figures moved slowly through the fog, staggered, twitching. Dozens. Maybe more. Riley ducked low behind a crushed sedan. Walkers? Frank cursed under his breath. No. They're too smooth. Too calm. As the figures came closer, the truth hit them like ice in the spine. They weren't zombies. They were people. But not normal people. Each wore a tattered uniform with a strange red symbol stitched onto the arm. They walked in formation, expressionless, weapons at their sides. Militia, Frank said darkly. Or what's left of one. Caleb's fingers tightened around the flare gun in his bag. Shouldn't we say something? They might be from the safe zone. No, Frank said immediately. We hide. As the strange soldiers passed below the overpass, Caleb noticed something even more chilling, a metal-collared zombie being led on a leash like a dog. It snarled but didn't lunge, controlled somehow by a device strapped to its back. What the? Riley whispered. They're using them? Frank's eyes narrowed. That ain't military. That's experimentation. That's something worse. The convoy passed without spotting them, disappearing into the haze. But the questions it left behind hung heavy. Who were they? What were they doing? And why were they controlling the undead? Black Lozenge. That night, they took shelter in the hollow remains of a community center. Old posters still hung on the walls, yoga classes, children's art shows, voting events. A frozen glimpse of the before. Caleb sat with the map spread out in front of him, but his mind wasn't on directions. They're experimenting on them, he said quietly. Frank didn't look up from his knife, which he was sharpening with steady precision. Seems like it. Why? I mean, who would do that? That can't be part of rebuilding. Some people rebuild, Frank replied. Others try to control what destroyed it. Riley picked at a granola bar, the last one they had. What if the safe zone is run by them? No one answered. That was the first moment Caleb began to fear the very hope they were chasing. Black lozenge. The next morning, they reached the suburban edge of the river district. Houses stood tilted and broken, windows shattered like open eyes. Wind chimes made eerie music as the breeze rolled in. They needed to cross the river to reach the next checkpoint. But the bridge had collapsed months ago. Only a single lifeboat remained, half inflated, tangled in weeds along the muddy shore. Caleb looked out over the slow-moving water. "We'll have to use it." Riley hesitated. "You sure it'll float?" "Only one way to find out." They patched the boat with duct tape from Frank's kit and pushed off slowly. The water was cold and quiet. Halfway across, the silence broke. A scream. Female. Nearby. Riley sat up. That wasn't far. Frank looked toward the northern bank. Trouble. They saw her, a young woman, maybe in her 20s, waving her arms wildly from the rooftop of a stranded bus. 3 infected were clawing at the side of the vehicle, trying to climb up. "Leave her," Frank said. "We can't save everyone." But Caleb didn't listen. He grabbed the flare gun. "Kid, don't!" He fired. The flare arced beautifully across the sky, landing just behind the zombies. The flash and heat startled the undead, drawing them away from the bus. Caleb started paddling faster. "We help her. We don't become like them." The woman jumped into the river and swam toward them, shaking and breathless. As they pulled her into the boat, Caleb looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Trust. "We're heading to Sector 12, Riley said. "You coming?" The woman nodded. "I was heading there, too, but something's wrong with that place." The boat drifted downstream in silence, their new companion shivering, her words lingering in the wind. Something was wrong with the safe zone. Black lozenge to be continued in Part 3. Would you like me to continue with Part 3 or give you a full outline for the remaining parts? The river's slow current carried them away from the crumbling suburbs, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's warning was a shadow trailing close behind. Her name was Elise. Her story was a patchwork of half-truths and fear. She claimed to have been part of a group of survivors making their way towards Sector 12 until they were ambushed, not by zombies, but by the same Red Arm Band militia they'd encountered on the highway. "They control everything now," Elise whispered, eyes darting to the dark trees lining the riverbank. "They say it's for protection, but it's really about power. The safe zone, it's not safe." Frank leaned against the boat's edge, his gaze distant. "Sounds like we're stepping into a hornet's nest." Caleb stared down at the water, rippling under the dim morning light. "Then we have to be smarter. We can't just run in blind." Elise nodded. "There's an old radio tower about 2 miles upriver. I heard from others there might be a way to contact survivors outside the zone. If we can get a message out, maybe others will know what's really going on." Riley exhaled sharply. "Great. So, first we risk the militia. Then we sneak into a tower swarming with who knows what. Just another day." Frank cracked a rare smile. "Survival isn't pretty, kid. It's dirty, dangerous, and damn near impossible." Black lozenge. They disembarked on the river's far side near a cluster of trees and moved cautiously through the overgrowth toward the skeletal silhouette of the radio tower. As they approached, the sharp metallic smell of rust mingled with the earthiness of damp moss. The tower loomed overhead, twisted by years of neglect and weather. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, not just from exertion, but from the unknown waiting inside. The door to the small operations shed at the base creaked open with a hesitant push. Inside, dusty equipment lay dormant, screens cracked, wires hanging like broken veins. Elise rummaged through piles of papers and tangled cables. "If I can just get the transmitter working, we can send a signal out. Maybe find other safe zones. Or at least warn people." Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground. Riley grabbed Caleb's arm. "What was that?" Outside, shadows flickered. Figures moving between the trees, militia patrols. We're trapped, Frank said grimly. No way out without them noticing. Elise's fingers flew over the keyboard, desperation sharpening her movements. Caleb scanned the window, then spotted something even more chilling, several collars identical to the one he'd seen on the zombified creature earlier, scattered among discarded crates. Those collars, they're experimenting on people to control them, Caleb said. Maybe even turning survivors into weapons. Elise's face paled. That's why the safe zone isn't safe. They're not just surviving, they're building an army. The militia's footsteps drew closer. Caleb gripped his flare gun, Frank readied his spear, and Riley steadied the crowbar. The radio crackled to life just as the door burst open. Elise! Get that signal out! Frank shouted. Elise's fingers flew, and a pulse of static filled the room. Transmitters on, she cried. Outside, the militia swarmed in. The three braced for a fight. Black lozenge. Suddenly, the radio emitted a piercing alarm tone. A voice came through, distorted but clear, "Attention all survivors. This is the Free People's Network. We have eyes on the militia's movements. Reinforcements are inbound." Caleb's heart surged. "Help is coming," he whispered. The militia hesitated, confusion flickering across their faces. Explosions echoed from the forest's edge as unknown allies engaged the patrol. In the chaos, Frank grabbed Caleb and Riley, pulling them toward a back exit. "Move! Now!" They sprinted through the underbrush, branches scraping their faces, hearts hammering. Behind them, shouts and gunfire faded into the night. After minutes that felt like hours, they collapsed near a stream, gasping for breath. Elise smiled weakly. That was close. Caleb looked up at the starless sky. We're not alone. Not yet. But the safe zone, Sector 12, held secrets darker than the night. And the fight for a new dawn had only just begun. Black Lozenge to be continued in Part 4. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Caleb, Frank, Riley, and Elise lay hidden beneath a canopy of gnarled branches and shadowy leaves. The distant gunfire had faded into silence, but the weight of what they'd just escaped clung tightly to their skin. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made their hearts race. They were safe, for now. Elise's eyes darted anxiously between her companions. We need to move. The militia won't give up that easily. Frank nodded grimly. They'll be back with reinforcements. If we linger, we'll be sitting ducks. Caleb wiped the sweat from his brow, the taste of dirt thick on his tongue. But where do we go? The river crossing is behind us. The safe zone ahead is compromised. In the woods, who knows what's lurking out here? Riley's voice was barely a whisper. We need shelter. A base. Somewhere to regroup and figure out our next move. Elise swallowed hard. There's an abandoned fire station a few miles east. Could be defensible. It's isolated, but it might work. Isolated can be good or bad, Frank said. Good because fewer eyes. Bad because no backup if things go south. Without hesitation, Caleb pushed himself up. We don't have much choice. Let's move. The trek was grueling. Twisted roots snagged their boots, and every shadow seemed alive with unseen eyes. The sun dipped lower, casting the world into twilight, and the temperature dropped sharply. Suddenly, a soft moan echoed through the trees. Riley stiffened, gripping her crowbar tighter. Not walkers, Frank murmured. Something else. A figure stumbled out from behind a tree, a man, ragged and pale, but unmistakably human. His eyes were wild, desperate. Please, he gasped. Help me. Elise stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? How did you get out here? The man's gaze flicked nervously over the group. Name's Jacob. I escaped the militia's camp. They're experimenting on us, turning people into weapons. Caleb exchanged a glance with Frank. More like what we saw with those collars. Jacob nodded feverishly. They use us as test subjects, soldiers. Some of us don't survive the process. Others, they lose themselves. Riley's face twisted in disgust. Monsters. Jacob shuddered. They're worse than monsters. They're betrayers. As they continued toward the fire station, Jacob filled in the chilling details, how the militia had seized control of key survivor settlements, forcing captives into cruel experiments. How some had tried to resist but were crushed ruthlessly. How hope was fading. Elise looked to Caleb, her voice steady but urgent. We can't let this go on. If the militia controls the safe zone and is turning survivors into weapons, then it's no longer a refuge, it's a prison. Frank scanned the horizon. Then we have to expose them. And fight back. Their small group had grown, not just by numbers, but by a shared purpose. They weren't just trying to survive anymore. They were fighting for a future. At last, the fire station came into view, its faded red paint peeling and windows boarded. They slipped inside, breathing in the stale air thick with dust and old memories. Makeshift barricades lined the doors and windows, signs of past attempts to keep danger out. Caleb found a cracked radio on a shelf. If we can repair this, we might be able to reach the Free People's Network again. Elise set to work, while Frank and Riley took positions near the entrances. Jacob, exhausted but alert, settled near a dusty cot. The night stretched long. Outside, distant groans of the undead echoed, a constant reminder of the peril beyond the walls. But inside, for the first time in days, there was a flicker of hope. Suddenly, a sharp noise shattered the quiet, a knock on the door. Everyone froze. Frank motioned to stay silent. The knocking came again, urgent, persistent. Elise whispered, "Who could it be?" Caleb cautiously peeked through a crack and spotted a figure slumped on the porch, a young girl, no older than 10, clutching a tattered doll. Riley's voice softened. She looked scared. Frank opened the door slowly. "Hey there. What's your name?" The girl's eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm Lily. Please, help me. They took my family." Caleb's heart clenched. "We're going to help you, Lily. But you have to be quiet. It's not safe out there." Lily nodded, her small hands trembling as she stepped inside. As the group huddled together, the fire station became more than a shelter. It was a fragile beacon in a world gone dark. But beyond its walls, shadows were gathering, secrets waiting to unravel, alliances ready to shatter, and betrayals yet to come. The dawn was new, but the fight was far from over. To be continued in Part 5. The fire station had become their fragile sanctuary, but the arrival of Lily, the frightened girl, introduced a new uncertainty. Caleb studied her carefully. In a world torn apart by betrayal, trust was a scarce commodity, one they couldn't afford to give away lightly. Elise gently placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Where did you come from, Lily? Who took your family?" The girl swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "The militia, they took them to the safe zone. They said it was for protection, but I don't believe them." Frank's jaw tightened. "We've seen what the militia really does. They lie. They control. And they use fear like a weapon." Caleb stepped forward, looking at the other survivors. "We need to decide what to do next. The safe zone is the key. If the militia is behind everything, controlling people, experimenting on survivors, then we have to find a way in." Riley glanced at Caleb. "That's suicide. We barely escaped their patrols yesterday." Jacob nodded grimly. "But it's the only way to help Lily's family and others trapped inside." The night was restless. As the group huddled in the dim glow of a makeshift lantern, tension simmered beneath the surface. They were running out of options, and time. Elisa's fingers traced maps and radio schematics. "If we can boost the signal from the tower, maybe more survivors will hear our call. We could coordinate a rescue." Frank shook his head. "The militia's eyes are everywhere. If they catch wind of a plan, they'll crush it before it starts." Caleb took a deep breath. "We have to try. For Lily. For all of us." Before dawn, the group prepared to leave the fire station and make their way back toward the safe zone, but under a different plan. Jacob had heard rumors of an underground entrance, a forgotten subway tunnel once used for emergencies. If they could find it, they might slip inside unnoticed. Lily clung to Elisa's hand as they moved through the cracked streets, shadows stretching long. Suddenly, a soft cry cut through the morning air. They turned to see a woman, wounded and desperate, emerging from an alley. "Help me," she begged. "They're coming." The militia. Caleb didn't hesitate. They pulled the woman into their group, though it increased their risk. As they neared the tunnel entrance, an eerie silence fell. The air smelled of damp concrete and rust. Inside, flickering lights cast long shadows on graffiti-covered walls. Riley shivered. "Feels like the dead are watching." Elise checked their supplies. "Stay close. We don't know what's down here." The narrow tunnel stretched ahead like a dark artery beneath the city. Suddenly, a faint tapping echoed from deeper within. Frank raised his spear. "Someone's here." From the shadows emerged a man, his clothes torn, face gaunt, eyes haunted. "I'm Marcus," he said quietly. "I escaped the militia's camp months ago. I've been hiding here, waiting for others." Caleb studied him. "Can we trust you?" Marcus looked away. "I want to help. But there's something you need to know: the militia is more dangerous than you realize. They're planning something big." As they pressed on through the tunnels, whispers of betrayal and resistance echoed off the cold walls. Caleb felt the weight of their mission settle heavily on his shoulders. They weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting for the future of dead America. And in the darkness of the underground, every step was a step deeper into the unknown. To be continued in Part 6. The subway tunnel stretched endlessly before them, a labyrinth of flickering lights and echoes. Every footstep bounced against the damp concrete, a reminder of how vulnerable they were. Caleb's grip tightened around his makeshift spear, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Marcus, walking just ahead, glanced back. This route used to be the city's lifeline during emergencies. But it's been abandoned for years. We're lucky it hasn't collapsed. Elise kept close to Lily, whose small hand trembled in hers. The girl's eyes held a blend of fear and determination, the weight of lost family etched in her young face. "We have to keep moving," Caleb said quietly. "The militia's plans won't wait." Suddenly, a low rumble vibrated through the tunnel, dust falling from the ceiling. Riley's voice cracked. "Earthquake?" Marcus shook his head grimly. "Not natural. Someone's coming." They hurried forward, the tunnel narrowing until they reached a rusted metal door. Marcus pushed it open with a groan. Beyond was a stairwell leading up to a forgotten maintenance entrance, camouflaged by overgrown vines and rubble. Caleb peered outside. The outskirts of the militia-controlled zone lay just beyond the cracked asphalt and broken streetlights. The city was a ghost town, with barricades manned by grim-faced soldiers who didn't hesitate to shoot on sight. "We need a distraction," Frank whispered. "Something to draw their eyes away." Elise scanned the street below. "There's an old vehicle depot a few blocks east. If we can cause a fire there, it might pull some militia forces away." Caleb nodded. "It's risky. But it might be our best shot." As they made their way stealthily through the ruins, every shadow seemed alive with menace. From the shattered windows of abandoned buildings, eyes watched. The constant threat of the undead hung over them like a storm cloud. Lily squeezed Elisa's hand tighter. "Will we find my family?" she asked softly. Elise knelt to her level, voice steady. "We will try, Lily. Together." At the depot, the group worked quickly. Frank and Marcus gathered scrap wood and broken barrels while Caleb and Riley prepared to light the fire. Elise set up a lookout. "Once the fire starts, we have a short window before the militia sends reinforcements." A single spark ignited the dry wood. Flames roared to life, casting flickering shadows that danced wildly against rusted walls. Suddenly, the sound of boots pounding on pavement filled the air. "Move!" Caleb ordered, and they sprinted toward a nearby alley. But as they fled, a harsh voice cut through the chaos. "Stop! You're under arrest." Militia soldiers blocked their path, weapons raised. Marcus cursed under his breath. They knew we were coming. Caleb's heart pounded. They were trapped, no escape, no backup. Lily whimpered behind Elise as the soldiers advanced. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Caleb saw it, a group of walkers emerging from the shadows, drawn by the fire and noise. Suddenly, chaos erupted. The militia soldiers fought desperately to hold the line against the undead, while Caleb and the others seized the moment. Amidst the chaos, a militia officer barked orders into a radio. "Contain the outbreak. Don't let them escape." Frank growled, "We can't hold out much longer." Caleb looked to his group. "We split up. Meet back at the fire station." With one last glance at the burning depot and the battlefield unfolding behind them, they ran, each step carrying them deeper into the unknown. As the smoke rose above the city, the battle for survival took on a new meaning. They weren't just fighting the dead, or even the living militia. They were fighting for hope, against betrayal, fear, and the darkness threatening to consume them all. To be continued in Part 7. The city streets echoed with distant gunfire and the guttural groans of the undead, fading as Caleb, Elise, Riley, Frank, Lily, and Marcus raced through the broken alleys, each heartbeat pounding with urgency and uncertainty. Their carefully laid plans had fractured into chaos, leaving them scattered and vulnerable. Caleb's lungs burned as he glanced back. The militia's soldiers were in hot pursuit, their shouts echoing like a death knell. "We can't outrun them forever," Frank warned, glancing toward a collapsed building with a partially open basement hatch. "We hide. We regroup." Without hesitation, Caleb led the group toward the hatch, prying it open and slipping inside into the dank darkness below. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mold. Flickering light from a cracked lantern revealed graffiti-covered walls and forgotten machinery long dormant. "Keep quiet," Elise hissed. "We don't know who else might be down here." Once hidden, Lily crouched close to Elise, trembling. "Will they find us?" Caleb squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Not if we stay smart. We'll figure this out." Marcus leaned against a pipe, eyes scanning the shadows. "The militia's grip is tightening. If we want to make a difference, we'll have to find allies inside the safe zone." Riley frowned. "Allies? After what we've seen, who can we trust?" "Not everyone," Marcus admitted. "But some survivors are resisting. There's a group calling themselves the Lightbearers. They've been quietly sabotaging militia operations." Frank's voice lowered. "We need them. If we're going to expose the militia's experiments and free the captives, including Lily's family, we can't do it alone." Suddenly, a faint noise echoed down the tunnel, voices, low and hurried. Caleb motioned for silence, holding his breath as shadowy figures approached. The group tensed, prepared for confrontation. But the figures stopped at the edge of the light, hands raised in peace. A woman stepped forward, her face hardened but kind. "We're the Lightbearers," she said softly. "We've been watching you. We want to help." Elisa's eyes narrowed. "Why should we trust you?" The woman smiled faintly. "Because we want the same thing. Freedom." The group followed the Lightbearers deeper into the tunnels, emerging into a hidden underground chamber filled with maps, radios, and supplies. Survivors moved with purpose, fixing radios, planning routes, sharing whispered news. Caleb felt a flicker of hope stir. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond survival. The leader of the Lightbearers, a sharp-eyed man named Owen, greeted them. "We've heard about the militia's experiments. It's worse than anyone imagined." He laid out a plan, a daring raid on the central militia compound to free prisoners and seize data on the experiments. It was dangerous, but it was their chance to strike back. As the group prepared, tension simmered beneath the surface. Trust was fragile, and the weight of betrayal hung heavily. Lily pulled Caleb aside. "Will you find my family?" He met her gaze. We will. I promise. Elise exchanged a worried look with Riley. If this goes wrong. It can't, Caleb said firmly. Not now. The night before the raid, the survivors gathered in the chamber. The hum of anticipation mixed with fear. Frank whispered to Marcus, "We're not just fighting zombies or soldiers anymore. We're fighting for the soul of dead America." Caleb stood before the group, voice steady. "Tomorrow, we take back our future." Outside, the city lay silent under a blanket of stars, waiting for the dawn. The fight was far from over. To be continued in Part 8. Would you like me to write the thrilling conclusion, Part 8? The first light of dawn barely touched the cracked horizon as Caleb and the group gathered their gear in the hidden chamber. The raid on the militia compound was more than a mission, it was a chance to reclaim their shattered world. Every heartbeat echoed with the weight of hope and fear. Owen, the leader of the Lightbearers, outlined the plan one last time. "We strike fast, disable their communications, and free the prisoners. The militia's control depends on fear and silence. We'll break both." Caleb glanced at Lily, her face set with quiet determination. "We do this together. For everyone who's lost." Moving like shadows, the group slipped through forgotten passageways and back alleys, inching closer to the compound's fortified walls. Guards patrolled with mechanical precision, unaware of the storm about to break. Frank whispered, "Stay alert. One mistake and it's over." Elise nodded, fingers tightening on her makeshift weapon. Riley scanned the perimeter, eyes sharp. Inside the compound, fluorescent lights buzzed coldly. The air smelled sterile but carried an undercurrent of menace, an eerie silence before the chaos. Caleb led the way to the central control room, where the militia's data and prisoner records were kept. With Marcus's expertise, they hacked the systems, downloading files that revealed horrifying experiments, attempts to control the undead mind and use survivors as weapons. Elise's voice shook. "We need to expose this." Suddenly, alarms blared. Militia soldiers stormed the hallways. Gunfire erupted. Chaos exploded. The group fought fiercely, using their knowledge of the compound to evade capture and protect one another. Lily stayed close to Caleb, courage blooming in her eyes despite the danger. Frank took down soldiers with swift precision. Riley and Elise covered the rear, buying time. In the midst of the battle, Caleb found a locked holding cell. Inside were dozens of survivors, weak but alive, including Lily's family. Tears streamed as Lily embraced her mother and younger brother. "We're safe now," Caleb whispered. Outside, the Lightbearers ignited fires and broadcasted the militia's secrets over hijacked radio waves, waking the city to the truth. Survivors stirred, their spirits rekindled. As the sun climbed, the militia's hold began to crumble. Caleb stood among the freed, looking at the city bathed in a new light, a dawn breaking through years of darkness. "We've lost much," he said softly, "but this is our beginning. Together, we will rebuild." Elise smiled. A new dawn in dead America. The journey ahead was uncertain, but hope glowed brighter than ever. In the heart of ruin, humanity's light endured. And that light would never be extinguished. The end. If you want, I can also help with ideas for narration style, chapter summaries, or anything else for your audiobook. Would you like that?